Hello everybody out there, how are you guys doing? This is Rob of Rule of Two Review, welcome back to the channel. And today, with the topic of the next Nintendo Direct looming sometime ahead of us, I wanted to focus a little bit more on the possibilities that I personally see of Metroid appearing at the show. Now, I do want to tell you guys right up front that this isn't about a rumor or a leak or anything like that. I'm not trying to start that kind of a rumor conversation, and I'm not leaking any inside information that I've heard either. This is just myself as a fan theorizing and speculating and predicting, because that's what's fun to do when we know that a Nintendo Direct is probably right around the corner, and because I am that Metroid guy that's always talking about it and thinking about it, I have many thoughts on the likelihood of Metroid showing up at the show. Some of my recent videos, I've touched on this as well, so you might already know that I feel that Metroid has a great shot at showing up, but I wanted to take today's video to really dive deeper into that. Of course, before we dive any deeper into the Metroid and Nintendo Direct topic, I like to remind you guys that I'm always trying to grow the channel here on Rule of Two Review. I am close to 20,000 subscribers and hoping to hit that sometime in the next 6 months to year. I upload every single week and I talk about all things Nintendo and all things Metroid and all things gaming. So as you watch this video, if you seem to like what I'm doing and what you hear, then I hope you will consider subscribing to the channel. So here's the thing. Let's get down to brass tacks here. The Nintendo Direct. Is it coming before the end of this month, June of 2022? No one knows for sure. Plenty of people are talking about and corroborating this idea of the Nintendo Direct happening on June 29th, so right before the very end of the month. I tend to think that that's very likely, and some of the people who said that that's true are people who I know and I even trust. I haven't had any behind-the-scenes conversations with them. I have no problem sharing that part with you about this exact topic. But I do believe a lot of those people when it comes to the things that they believe. And so, yeah, sure. For the sake of argument, let's just, for the rest of this video, go on the assumption that June 29th, or at bare minimum the last week of June, is when we will see the next Nintendo Direct. This is the one that will, in theory, kind of be taking the place of their normal E3 Direct, because we know E3 was canceled, and everyone else in the industry has been stepping up and having state of plays, and Xbox and Bethesda showcases, and Summer Games Fest, and Capcom presentations, and all of that. So we're waiting for Nintendo to do the same thing, fill their same summer E3 slot with some kind of a Direct, and also share what they have planned for the rest of the year and beyond. And yes, we all expect updates and information about Zelda, Breath of the Wild 2, Xenoblade Chronicles 3, Bayonetta 3, Splatoon 3. As I like to joke, those are the 3 threes, right? Splatoon, Bayonetta, and Xenoblade. The 3 threes that we think might actually launch in 2022. And plenty of other things. We all expect that. Maybe some big surprise announcements in games and IPs we haven't heard from in a while. But for me, I, of course, as I tend to do, focus my sights squarely on Samus and Metroid. Will we be hearing from the Metroid franchise at this show? There's plenty of reason to think that we won't. There's many arguments you could make for why Metroid and Samus won't show up at all in the show. But I don't think that that's going to happen. My Metroid and Samus radar is going off the charts, and I think that if we get this Summer Direct in the last week of June, I think Samus is going to be there. I think of the many reasons that I believe this is going to happen, the biggest reason is probably because Metroid Dread released only, 6, 7, maybe almost 8 months ago at this point, and it was a huge hit. We all know Metroid Dread, not only was it a fantastic game, but it generated a ton of hype. It revived the interest in Metroid as a franchise and Samus as a character in the hearts and minds of many people and many gamers, even outside of us in the diehard Metroid community. And it also became the best-selling Metroid game of all time. And the importance of that cannot be understated. It's crazy how successful that game was, from a review standpoint, from a critical reception and a fan reception, and from a sales perspective. This game was a huge monumental moment for the Metroid franchise. And what's extra unique about the whole Metroid Dread situation is that game was both revealed and then also released after the announcement of Metroid Prime 4. So we already had a different Metroid game confirmed to be in development several years before Metroid Dread was even known to the world as a real game, right? That was going to be coming out on the Nintendo Switch. And yes, it went through the rocky development, and they switched teams, and they restarted the game in January of 2019. We all know this and have covered it several times, especially me here on this channel. But that doesn't take away from the fact that the game still does exist and has been in development from before the time Metroid Dread was revealed and released. And so to have this game come out and be so successful in a period where we've also been waiting for updates on the other Metroid game, Prime 4, that was announced in 2017, means that Nintendo is in a very, I think, special position to be able to capitalize on the hype and the upwards trajectory of the Metroid franchise, right? Now, they might drop the ball, and in my opinion, dropping the ball would be to ignore Metroid in this next Nintendo Direct if it happens in June. But I don't think that they're going to do that. This is one of the main... This is the essence of my thesis statement here, is that in this period, 7 to 8 months after Metroid Dread released and is the most successful Metroid game of all time, and the world is focused on Metroid again, this is the time for them to capitalize on that. They've already announced Metroid Prime 4. There's no mystery on the other game being developed, so why not talk about an update to Metroid, the franchise, in a variety of ways? I really think there is, I would say, a 75% chance that Metroid is going to be addressed at this Direct. Now, I think there are 3 different ways that Nintendo could address Metroid in this next Direct, and I think that we all know what those are, right? The first, and probably least exciting, would be if they just announced some other update to Metroid Dread. And I only say least exciting because there's a chance they just do another free update where they add a mode to the game that doesn't really change or enhance the experience much, at least for me personally. Now, if they announce a significant DLC package that's like 5 to 7 hours of new gameplay with a new area to explore for 15 to 20 bucks, and it's this big story edition, that's a different story, and that would be a huge thing. So whichever one of those options would play out, there is a chance they basically just talk about Metroid Dread and some sort of new content or updates to that game. So that's one thing they might do, but I'm not putting a whole lot of money on that. The other 2 big things they could do is either talk about Metroid Prime 4, that would be the most shocking and the most exciting, I think, for them to give us an update on the game, some sort of hint at, like, I don't know, they could either say, we're going to share the game with you before the end of 2022, that would be huge news, or they could go a huge step and actually give us a sneak peek at the game. Whether that's just glimpses at, like, what Samus is going to look like at the game, maybe like 30 seconds worth of, like, cinematic moments, or 30 seconds worth of even gameplay, or even just a confirmation of a date. What if they say, we're not ready to show you Metroid Prime 4, but it's coming soon, and it's going to release in 2023? What if they just say something like that? That alone would be a huge headline, and I think that there is a very, very strong possibility that they could do that. And of course, the last and other obvious thing that they may do is they could finally address the long-rumored and long-desired Metroid Prime Trilogy remaster that has been rumored to be in development for the Switch, and that we all think is probably happening, taking the first 3 Prime games that released on the GameCube and the Wii, updating them in whatever ways Nintendo may update them. Probably, you know, they're going to adapt the controls to both the Pro Controller and to the Joy-Cons, and obviously make them HD at bare minimum so that they look, you know, the same way like Skyward Sword or Wind Waker went from standard definition to high definition. They might do the same with those first 3 Prime games, take them from SD and make them HD. And that would be nice. Now, what would be better is if they updated the visuals beyond just an HD polish and actually added, I don't know, newer textures and lighting effects, maybe smoothed out some of the polygons and the architecture of the graphics. I don't know. I mean, to me, you get into more remake territory at that point, and maybe they wouldn't charge $60 for 3 games if they put that much effort into it. So tough to say there. But this conversation also includes a secondary rumor that also could be happening, which is, instead of an HD polish to the first 3 games, a full ground-up remake of the original Metroid Prime. That is something that popped up in the last year. Emily Rogers is one of the first people to talk about it as being likely. And maybe instead of a trilogy remaster, it's a Prime 1 remake. Now, to me, both of these would get me excited, but if I could pick one or the other, I want the Prime 1 remaster because I already own several copies of the first 3 games across multiple things. I've got the trilogy collection. I've got the games individually on their respective platforms. I've played them so many times over. I love them. Metroid Prime 1 is my favorite game of all time. And so, sure, having them again in HD would be fine and exciting, but it would just be the same games, in HD that I've played so many times. But if they take my favorite game ever made, Metroid Prime, and they give it a full-on remake, the same way they did with Metroid Samus Returns, maybe even more along the lines of Sony's Shadow of the Colossus, or even the Final Fantasy VII remake, any one of these tiers of remaking the game, from the graphics to the content within it, that is huge, because then it's going to feel like more of a new experience than if they just take the same experiences and just give them an HD wash. Sure, that would be nice, but imagine taking the original game, which is, for most people, their favorite game, and it's, again, my favorite game ever made, ever. If you give that the remake treatment of Shadow of the Colossus or Final Fantasy VII, I mean, get out of town. That is way more valuable to me than just playing the same 3 games that just look slightly better. I mean, that's just me. You may feel differently, and that's okay. You may see more value in getting 3 games as opposed to 1, and I understand that. But to me, 3 games that are otherwise identical doesn't make me as excited as 1 game that's completely remade. And the fact that it's also my favorite game makes me even more biased to that decision, right? So, I don't know, I'm kind of really riffing and rambling about the whole Prime remake remaster thing, but it's important to talk about because many of us think it's happening. I think Nintendo is doing something with those games, and so, bringing this back to the Nintendo Direct conversation, would they talk about this or any of these things at the show? And yes, I think there is a 75% chance that in some way, shape, or form, one of these Metroid topics and games will be discussed at this Direct. Now, the last thing I want to focus on before wrapping this up is Metroid Prime 4. I want to come back to that again, because I still think that ultimately this is the more important thing for them to talk about. And similar to the last topic, I think that, I can see a lot of people disagreeing with that, right? People just want the Prime trilogy now because it's something that they could have now, and they're just sick of waiting because it's been in the conversation for like 4 freaking years at this point. It's ridiculous. And so I think a lot of people would say, whatever to Metroid Prime 4, let's just do the Prime trilogy right now. And I understand that line of thinking, but I don't feel that way because to me, the newer game, the sequel game, Metroid Prime 4 being a sequel to Prime 3, the fact that it's a new adventure and something we know nothing about, having the veil lifted off that game, to me, is far, far, far more important than a Prime Trilogy remaster or even a Prime 1 remake. I think we need to be more focused on what's new and what's ahead of us and what's fresh than always revisiting the past. Even though I want the remaster or the remake. I want those things too, and I think we can even have them all. But I really want to see Nintendo finally address Metroid Prime 4 in a more significant way. And I really think there's about a 50% chance that Prime 4 specifically is addressed in this Direct. Now, we have to remember at E3 last year, before they revealed Metroid Dread, they did say, hey, we're making Metroid Prime 4, I'm sure you're excited, but before we talk about that, here's this new Metroid game, and then they revealed Dread. And so, it was nice to hear them actually acknowledge Metroid Prime 4 in some way, shape, or form. Lest we forget that at the beginning of this year, and I covered this in a couple of videos, we actually had Retro Studios update their Twitter banner with this never-before-seen Samus concept art. That is, without question, you will never convince me otherwise, some sort of art that represents Metroid Prime 4. That is exactly why this exists. Nothing here shows us that it's from any of the first 3 Metroid Prime games. We see Samus wearing her Metroid Prime Various suit. I am sure of that when I look at those shoulder pads. But outside of Samus wearing the Metroid Prime version of the Various suit, the environment she's in is nothing from the first 3 Prime games. That is a Metroid Prime 4 concept art and a Metroid Prime 4 tease. I am 100% certain of that. And the fact that they did that this year, 3 to 4 months before this June Nintendo Direct would happen, if that thing is real, yeah, I just think there's a great chance they're going to talk about Metroid Prime 4, you guys. Now, again, whether they show us gameplay, whether they show us a full trailer, whether they just give us a slight tease of what Samus is going to look like and talk about a date for next year, whatever, that's up for debate. But I think that the game very likely is going to release next year. You've heard me say I think it's going to be a cross-generation release and also launch on their next-generation console, which I also think will probably come out next year. And so, to wrap this up, it just all brings us back to this next Nintendo Direct that we think might happen this month at the end of the month. And these are all the reasons, whatever it is, a Dread update, a Trilogy remaster, a Prime 1 remake, or a Metroid Prime 4 update, or a combination of any of these things, I really believe in my heart and soul that we are going to see and hear from Metroid and Samus in some meaningful way in this next Nintendo Direct. So these are my thoughts and feelings and predictions on the whole matter. What do you guys think? Do you think that we are on the cusp of hearing from Samus and Metroid again? Do you think that it will show up at this next Nintendo Direct? Or do you think it's just going to stay radio silent for a long time? At this point, I feel like a lot of people are more focused on the Prime Trilogy simply because everyone has convinced themselves that Metroid Prime 4 is like 5 years away at any given moment. No one is allowing themselves to believe that Retro Studios is getting closer to the end of the development of that game, and I don't know why. I guess it's because of the delay in 2019, but we have to think realistically about it, guys. I don't think that way. Here's the thing. Every day is one step closer to the reveal of that game. Every day is one more day's worth of development that Retro Studios is doing on that game. So the game isn't 5 years away for an eternity. Like, we are getting closer to the game being revealed and released. So why isn't it possible after 3 years of them restarting the game in 2019? It's been 3 years of development, you guys, 3.5 years. Why isn't there a great chance that they've got something to show to us in 2022? And why couldn't that be in this next Nintendo Direct? So, you know, I thought I was going to end the video, and then I went into this other kind of tangent, but anyway, so that's what I have to say. That's why I think there's a chance we see it. So do you think I'm crazy, or do you think there's something real there? Whatever you feel, talk about Metroid and the Nintendo Direct below. That's a wrap for this video. Thanks, of course, as always, for tuning in, guys. This is Rob of Rule of Two Review, and I'll catch you next time on another video. Bye-bye.